Welcome everybody to another episode of the Key to Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. I am Josh Beiser, and joining me, my co-host, indie developer from Casual Game Studio, Joshua Reyes. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, my man. Busy day, a busy week of game dev. I got a new mic upgrade, so that's pretty nice. Hopefully, it sounds good. And I just finished my taxes for my Indiedev studio, so that's kind of a good segue into what we're going to be talking about.
Mm-hmm.
How are you, Josh?
This week, I got to experience the
Yeah,
joy of getting user feedback and
that's right.
playtesting with the cover art for my book on RPG design. Now I know all about the horrors that developers go through when it comes to getting feedback.
It's a
But
ton of fun. Feedback's the best. I love
yes.
it.
But it's finally done. I can now start, or I can now
Good.
focus all my attention on the RPG book, and then I'm going to be having a chat with the publisher about where they want to hopefully go with things in the future this week. So I'm
Good
both
deal.
nervous and excited at the same time. So we'll see how that shakes up
Oh,
for.
come feeling in indie dev.
Yeah. But hope everyone is having a great week. We did set the announcement a lot earlier, so let us know if you guys like this in terms of getting the announcement like an hour or so before the show. So, with that said, however, our topic this week is a very interesting one. We're going to be talking about some of the misconceptions and I think traps a lot of developers fall into, not so much going from indie to AAA, but going from AAA to indie. And we've talked a lot about kind of the differences between the two sides, or like past shows and so on. But there's a very interesting aspect. I know we've discussed this before, that when we look at kind of the state of indie dev from like 2010 to where it's at now, for the first few years, indie dev was considered again the stepping stool or a stepping stone. Like the goal wasn't to become an indie dev. The
No.
goal was to become famous as an indie dev to levy that to get a job. It was very much akin to, making an indie like art house movie to then get picked up by like a Marvel or Universal
Exactly.
Studios. And a lot of indie devs in like the first half of the 2010s saw it that way. We saw a lot of developers who got one big game. They got picked up by a major company. They, closed their studio, whatever. That did not stay. And what we then saw kind of in the back half of 2010 to where we're at today is that indie dev is not a stepping stone anymore. It is a legitimate and very viable business. It's a place where you can make what you want with the team of your choosing. You don't need to worry about, publisher or shareholders going after you. And with the recent announcement of layoffs at places like Microsoft
Yeah.
and Google, you don't need to worry about letting yourself go at your own company. Josh, you don't have to worry about waking up and
No.
finding a card reader on your door saying, you're fired when you pass your
No.
key card.
No, not at all. Yeah, and I mean that's like it's definitely a huge sea change, and I kind of wouldn't have seen it like when we were talking back that it was a stepping stool, right? It was our
Mm-hmm.
stepping stone. It was like, yeah, I'm gonna develop it. I'm gonna cut my teeth, make some few games, and then I'll
Mm-hmm.
get hired and be in the big leagues. But now it's definitely changed, and I've said this before. I All India devs I know do not want to work in AAA. It is not something that they are looking forward to. Like you said, indie game development now is such a viable way to do it. There's so many avenues and paths and ways for someone to make a living in this now, and it is highly respected now. I think that also like a side tangent into that is just like the AAA malaise, right? People are extremely bored with AAA, and that led to indies just being a little more people looking at them more often, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even we can even go like another step below that. We talked about this last week with stuff like RPG Maker and conversion
Yes.
mods for stuff like GZ Doom. That these are really legitimate and solid games, and they really have become like a testbed for people to experiment with a unique and original design. What was it the game? Oh, I was just seeing on Twitter this past week that there's now an RPG maker for 3D RPGs.
Wow.
And someone even made one that makes it turn to like a paper aesthetic, kind of like a Paper Mario for like one of the RPG makers. And again, like
Check that
this
out.
is stuff that's really fantastic. And like we were saying last week, like I think like 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of people have looked down on like free engines, conversion mods,
Yeah.
stuff like that. But look at the boomer shooter craze over the past four
Hmm.
or 5 years with the rise of Dusk, Ultra Kill, all those many again conversion mods. Cultic was one of my favorite games of last year.
Yes.
So, like you said, it's not considered, the black sheep of the game industry anymore. Like, the indie dev space is not kind of like where you go to either sink or swim. It is just another very potentially lucrative and legitimate way of releasing and working in this industry.
Definitely. I mean, I remember when people would cringe, right, when they would see the Unity splash screen,
Mm,
and they'd be like, "Oh no," you know what I mean? But now, it's just totally different, and it totally accepted. I love it, and I love that now it's so viable. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
And just to repeat myself again, I never saw that this sea change was going to happen. I always kind of thought it was going to stay this way,
mm-hmm,
but I think just things changes. COVID, there was just certain things that happened, and I think that just it helped it now, and so now it's
mm-hmm.
just extremely viable.
Yep, and again, we have to pay a lot of credit to the rise of digital platforms, Steam, Itch, Humble, so on, with being able to, again, you don't need to wheel and deal with a GameStop or
Yes,
at Walmart or any place like that. Again, $100 gets you a Steam store page.
right,
Itch is literally free.
free.
And these are great ways to get your game in front of people, and again, to see, get that impression as to what your quality is. And even if, again, as we've said, like, even if your first 1, 5, 10 games doesn't sell, or it just maybe gets 5 to 10 people, that's a start. That's a way of growing. And again, one of the biggest, I think, shockers for me over the past, like, I would say 7 to 8 years has been the number of, like, first time and early indie developers I've interviewed who've had amazing games. They really understood what the design they wanted to do. Were they, the next Call of Duty or Mass Effect? No. But they showed a lot of very impressive stuff simply being like one of their first games compared, like you said earlier, with the AAA malaise. Like, I don't play a lot of AAA games anymore because why would I want to play the same game over and over again?
Exactly. Exactly. And the barrier to entry, like you're talking about, a lot of people having really good first games is because the tools out there we have so many tools now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we haven't had our full on AI show yet, but there's so many like AI things that help with us. There's so many amazing engines that we can use.
Mm-hmm.
Unity, Godot, RPG Maker, RPG 3D Maker, Unreal, of course, Blender. There's so much software that allows like a solo person or a small team to create a much larger and grandiose than we would ever be able to like 5 years ago or 10 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, right? So the
Yep.
barrier to entry being dropped so low has really allowed devs to like really come out with their first game and to really focus on it and come out instead of doing like we've talked about before a lot of the very basic stuff such as like we bring up the car analogy, like still a lot of the times we're creating like the particles for the tire, choosing
Mm-hmm.
what color it's going to be, the physics, the sound it's going to make, and etc. And when a lot of those things are taken care for you already, you can focus on the design and the creativity part of it. And so that's a lot
Mm-hmm.
what has to do with the barrier being dropped, Josh.
Yep. And I think that is a really good segue into the major topic. That with that barrier entry being so low, it's let a lot of major developers and people who worked at massive
Yeah.
companies. Like, we saw the reverse. Instead of indie being the stepping stone to AAA, we've seen AAA kind of being the stepping stone to indie. With a lot of people, and especially the last, like, again, 7 to 8 years in particular, I've lost count of how many indie games I've seen someone who worked at the studio so and so. This was the UI designer from the secondary studio who worked on Mass Effect. This was people who worked on Call of Duty, who worked on Halo. Again,
God of
like,
War. Yep.
yep. And on my thumbnail, I showed this character from Call of Duty. Did you know there's different personalities of the Call of Duty characters? I saw a Call of Duty personality quiz. of which Call of Duty character are you? I just thought they were all Soldier McSoldierton. Was
I didn't know. Did you take it?
no, I didn't, man.
We'll put it in the chat. Let's see what kind of soldier everybody is.
Yeah. And again, we have this case where you would assume that having that background in AAA would grant you a huge advantage. But almost every time I see one of these games, it is either very derivative, it doesn't play well, and in some cases, the game never gets done. Like, they go into early access, and then 5 to 7 years later, still nothing.
I think more often than not getting done is more usually what happens more often, right? That usually they get the funding and everything, and it just doesn't go through. And okay, so like we get UI designers, you get a quest designer, and they're like, okay, I want to start. Sadly, when you're working in AAA, you are a cog in a machine, and the machine is built around you and it's operating. And you may think that, okay, I'm doing UI or I'm doing 3D modeling or programming, so thus I understand how to publish a game, how to market a game. There's so many aspects, Josh. But there's so like they believe that, okay, I'll be able to do that, and then once you get into that realm, you realize, oh wow, there is no PR department, there is no marketing department. I don't have someone that I could make up a sound for me. You know what I mean? And then you're talking about the game not playing well. Play testing, like they had a whole QA team before they didn't. And when you don't have all of that support system, you have to develop it yourself. So then we're talking about like going back to like Indiedev step 0. Like you're literally going to step 0. You may have some skills, right? It's like, okay, you have some skills in as developing games or working on games, but as far as releasing an indie game, you're literally at step 0. And I think that's where the issue is.
And you just cause a lot of mental stress to a lot of any devs with like the checklist you just laid out there.
We said like 3 of 4. There's like 20,000 more things. It was so short.
Yep, and to your point, like one of the first, I think, most recognizable traps a lot of people run into is this idea that, hey, I worked on Call of Duty. Surely that means I could make Call of Duty in indie form, or Mass Effect, or whatever, Skyrim. But one of the first things you have to understand, again, is that, as you just said, your resources have been majorly cut. And just because you were part of the team that kind of assisted the major team that did the quest design for Skyrim or No Man's Sky or whatever big game you can think of, that doesn't mean you know 100% everything that has to do with that job. It doesn't mean you understand the actual design of all that. As you said, with the cog in the machine analogy, I interviewed one of a developer, I forget his name, he worked on the original Rampage, and he does a lot of consulting and stuff in the industry. And he said that one of the biggest things I try to tell people is that if you're working at a AAA studio, if you're hired to do grass modeling textures, that's your job for 6 to 12 months. Like, if you think that can then say, well, I did grass textures for the last 6 months, now I can make a fully procedurally open world RPG, it doesn't work that way. And you have to be very aware of what you can and can't do when you when you lose, again, all those resources.
Exactly. So like when you're losing, so the thing is like you're going from the cog in the machine and then to nothing. And so the thing okay, let me restart. So as an indie dev, you have to wear so many hats, right? And then again, you're just wearing like literally one. You've been grass modeling for 8 months, 9 months, or doing skin texturing, or doing rigging, and are doing quest design. And the thing is that there's a quadrillion other hats that you have to wear, from community management, from like running your community management, QA, sound, art direction, and the biggest thing I think when you were talking about the games coming out and they're being derivative is I think that a lot of devs like, okay, well, I worked on a God of War, so let me just make a smaller indie game God of War, and that's where you get that kind of watered down thing. They believe that I'm just making a smaller game, or because it's indie, it's smaller. You know what I mean? And of course, that's not how it works. Go ahead, Josh.
And to piggyback off of that, another big trap you have to worry about is that people in the indie space, they don't care about your name. Unfortunately, one of the saddest truths that we've seen is that when you are that cog in the machine, your name and your credit in a major game, that certainly helps you on your resume. It helps you when you're trying to apply to a job. It means almost nothing when it comes to the independent space. You can say that, I had a hand in God of War, in Mass Effect, Battlefield. I did, stuff in Mario. Well, guess what? Indie community or indie consumers, they don't care about that. As we've said, unless your name is literally Hideo Kojima, Sid Meier, Shigeru Miyamoto, your name means to them as much or as little as your store page. And if your store page isn't good, again, why should someone give you the time of day?
Exactly, Josh. And that's another part is that. So you're coming from AAA, and you have a giant marketing budget, you have so much going around you, and then you come to indie, and then you're like, well, where do I start? How do I go? And that's where you really have to start analyzing. Okay, what are my skills and what are my weaknesses, and what do I need to do to make this happen with a team? Right? Do I need a team? Do I need other people to fill in my weaknesses? Because if you're only a grass modeler, that's not going to bring a lot to the table. And you need a lot more than that. And like I said, there's a ton more hats that you need to wear. And like the main person, like say the top head guy of an indie studio, for example, needs to understand nearly every aspect of game design. This is one thing that we need to get into, is that you have to, about game creation, game design, you have to understand every aspect of it, like how everything fits together. If you don't, then you're going to be spending most of your time trying to figure out how to put the puzzle together, because you were working in a giant, huge team that knew how to put it together with all the other people. But instead, now what? You got one person, two people, three people, four people, maybe 10 if you were, a big name. But even then, someone has to know how everything goes together, and then you have to have the talented people that work with it. So I think it's so much easier to go from indie to AAA. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you can. But the opposite way is just doesn't work anymore.
And it's that kind of issue of, yes, I worked on a Call of Duty game or whatever. Do you actually understand everything that made that game popular?
Right.
And then the follow-up is, can you actually produce that without the backing of Activision, without their QA team, without their marketing department? Because that's another thing that I see. A lot of the games that come from AAA to indie oftentimes have horrible marketing practices. Like, I may never hear about the game until it's like maybe a day before it comes out. The store page looks horrible. It has like a thumbnail that, I've seen like first-time indie developers have like a better grasp of thumbnail design. Here's another big point. I've seen so many like soulless trailers from these games. It may just be like characters like walking around. There's like music that doesn't fit. And it's like the most generic of generic gameplay. And again, they may do that thing where, the first 10 minutes of trailers from the costume designer of the studio that brought you Mass Effect. And it's like, okay, but this isn't Mass Effect. This is, a 3D basic looking third person shooter.
Right.
And again, I think it's that kind of like throwing cold water on someone that, yes, you may have worked on AAA, that doesn't mean anything here unless you can somehow will the same Q&A team, marketing budget and all that into your game. It's just not going to have that same impact.
Not at all. Not at all. And I mean, one of the things you have to consider, like, I'm not sure. I mean, I understand. I understand 100% why someone would want to go from AAA to indie because, like you said before, there's no board members to be beholden to.
Mm-hmm.
You can be agile, you can create your own thing, and this and that. But you have to understand, like you have to understand so much about indie dev that you can't just jump. Yeah, you have to start, right? You have to start. But if you're already in the game industry, I think before you jump out of AAA, that you should start learning more about how indie games are created, published, marketed, because it's a whole different game, right? And if you ask an indie game dev what it's like to be an indie game dev, and you ask a AAA dev what it's like, it's going to be two completely different stories. The
Mm-hmm.
indie dev will tell you, "Oh yeah, today I did some programming, I did some audio, I did some code, also did a little bit of PR." The AAA guy will be like, "Yeah, I went to 2 meetings, and then I worked on my skin textures all day." And there's a difference. There's a huge difference in how much you have and how much you have to do as an indie dev. I think the thing goes that if you work for somebody, you do 40 hours. If you're working for somebody else, you usually have to do about, if you're working for yourself, it's like double that, like the amount of work that you have to put into. And that's because you don't have that support system there. So that's like the most important thing. One of the most important things you have to consider. Without that support system, how can I organize a team? What can I create? How can I do this? And you have to understand your weaknesses and your strengths. And again, a name cachet at the beginning of the trailer is worthless. In fact, it even turns me off when I see it. I'm like, that's all you're trying to sell me is just on your name. It's like, let me see again, usually those trailers are pretty soulless, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And when they just say, okay, here's my name, here's this, sometimes that can kind of turn me off because it's just like, instead I need to see gameplay, and instead of relying on your name and your cachet when it really is worthless, you know.
Mm-hmm. And that level of, again, trying to follow that success, it really does not work when you're going into the independent space, because people aren't going to try and look you up via your name or your company,
No,
especially if
no.
you're making a game that's not even closely resembling what you worked on. And like we've said, another big point is that just because you worked on genre A doesn't mean you are now an expert on every other genre that's ever been made. And that is another, I think, very easy trap to fall into. Again, with that kind of having the AAA machine behind you gives your studio a lot more in terms of iteration. It gives you a lot more in terms of play testing and feedback. There's a reason why many AAA games don't go experimental. There's too much risk involved.
Yep.
You can't be as agile if, let's say, after 2 years of development, this prototype doesn't work. If you're working with Activision or Electronic Arts or Nintendo, and you say, well, the last 2 years didn't count, give us more money, they're probably going to never work with you ever
No.
again. But
Yeah.
when you're in the independent space, you're free to experiment. And with that experimentation comes having to try and figure out, as you said, like, wear all the hats. Just because, hey, this cute little prototype we made looks good, that doesn't mean that you can then transform that over the next 5 to 8 years into the next, I don't know, Far Cry or the next Horizon Zero Dawn. And even if you have, again, those credentials that you've worked on those games, like we've said, there's a fundamental difference between being a game developer and being a game designer. Developer is, all aspects, the music, the art, programming, working on the marketing. but designing a game is very specific. And it's something that a lot of people, and I've said this before, even people who've worked on successful projects, may not fully grasp again, well, why did this game, sell 800,000 copies? And why did this one only sell 200 copies?
Exactly. Like, so even if you have the person who has the abilities and all the hats, and then they have the technical ability to create the game, the design aspect is missing, right? And because that's completely different. And usually the AAA will have a whole different, like, the designers are completely separate, and they delegate down to other things. You know what I mean? And instead, now you're also going to be designing and developing, marketing, doing the whole everything. And so that makes it very difficult when you're just, again, coming from that area, from the cog in the machine world.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at the game that I think Pony mentioned on the Discord this past week, Osiris New Dawn. Now, again, it says it's from veterans of AAA studios, and basically,
Which one?
Osiris New
Siren?
Dawn. It was in
Okay.
the game discussions,
Okay. Yes. See it now.
and they said that they went like completely silent for 5 years, which again is something you
Wow.
don't do in early access. And I do think that there may be some semblance of, I think, elitism. Not so much with this game, but I think with the idea of going from AAA to indie. This
Yes.
idea that, these, 3-person teams could make like a Celeste or this, horrible looking pixel art game. Well, I worked with Unreal. I, helped make Battlefield. I can do something 1,000 times better. And again, in a lot of cases, it does not work out that way. And again, it's one of those very surprising aspects that you would think that with the background in AAA, that it would kind of give you bonus points when you go into the independent space. But a lot of times it just doesn't work. And I think a lot of that comes from trying to force, like I think like the AAA mindset, or force like the same things you try to do in AAA to indie. Again, like even something like playtesting. Like how many people who worked at a major studio outside of the QA team actually did heavy playtesting and trying to parse feedback like that?
Yeah, parsing the feedback for sure. And I think that you mentioned that elitist thing, and I think that's that. I feel like they they can they believe that they can come into the indie space with their clout and basically, like you said, oh well, I've done this, so some lame pixel art game, I can definitely do better than that. And so again, they believe that indie games. I still think that AAA devs think that indie games are less and they're easier in some way, but it's far from the truth. I mean, it's far, far from it. Me and you, that's what we do. We talk about indie games more than anything. I think that's all we do. And we both know how difficult it is to get an indie game out there that is good, that sells, that is enjoyable, that lasts, and that plays. And it's just a completely different world. So,
And with, I think, from the design standpoint, again, you have to. This could also be another, I think, interesting point that when you're working the AAA, as we said, you don't necessarily work on evolving design in AAA. You work on iterating it. You're taking something that's already been done and saying, how do we make it better? This is, again, the MO of companies like Blizzard, or Blizzard in its heyday. In the independent space, you're never, or it's going to be rare as an indie developer to say, you know what? I can make Battlefield better than DICE. Or, Nintendo's a bunch of hacks. With my 3-person team and $50,000, I can make Super Mario Odyssey in half the time, and it's 1,000 times better than anyone else.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen, John.
Yep, and to Juan's comment, yep, it's that other. We can even see that with AAA going to AAA when we see like people who worked at one studio founding another studio.
Yes, that's right, and that is also another thing. They think they leave from a AAA start their own and realize, uh-oh. And it's kind of the same thing. They're still trying to do it's AAA, but again, you lose all your resources and you have a smaller team. And that has just happened many times.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've been touching on this point for the last 30 minutes, but it's very important to clarify or even go further. Understanding one part of the game dev machine is not the same as understanding all parts of it. And when you're forming your own company or you're doing things by yourself, you suddenly need to do a lot more. And again, even if you are the greatest 3D modeler, if you were, the top senior programmer on Call of Duty or on Diablo 3, guess what? You also now need to do art, sound design, Q&A, marketing, designing your game, being able to... What was that?
Debugging.
Yep, debugging. Again, more QA. And these are all things that they'll never... It doesn't go away. And again, I think it's that other aspect that we've seen this, I think, over the last 20 years. Like the mystique of being in a AAA studio. As I said, a lot of people equate, Nintendo, Blizzard, Activision as, Hollywood studios. That you go work for them and you're set for life. You become a big name star. And so the independent side is looked at as this lesser, you don't need to do all that. You just make a game and, it sells and everything is all great. But no, there's a lot. We could argue, I think, that there's a lot more work that goes into an indie success than it does from a AAA studio. And again, this brings back that very important point. Clout. You have zero clout in the indie space. As we've said before, Nintendo can put out a cardboard cutout saying, new game coming. And that's it. And that gets probably a few million views on YouTube and on Twitch. As an indie dev, you don't have that luxury. And again, like we said earlier, your name means nothing to me. You can say that, well, I have all these credits on these AAA games, and then I look at your indie game and it looks worse than something that I've seen from, students working on a game jam title over, 2 months or even like a year. Why should I give your game the time of day?
I would, going back to your point about indie, we can definitely, I think the argument is over. I think getting an indie game out and successful is definitely monumentally harder than doing it in the AAA space. Mm-hmm. I mean, from marketing, from just every single aspect of indie game development is very difficult, and it is probably one. I mean, working in a AAA is very simple. You're just doing your job, right? You're told what to do. You're basically given your job. Mm-hmm. No one is telling you what to do in an indie game dev. You have to figure out what to do. So I think that's one aspect that we have not really covered, is that you're basically told, okay, here, this is your design, here's your concept art that you're given, and instead now you have to come up with concept art or get some concept art and decide if that concept art is good. Is that the concept art I want to work? Does it work with my other art? Does it jive? Can I afford it? Can I afford this art? There's so many more things, instead of just saying, if I was in the AAA, hey, I need some art from my concept guy, and he gives me the art, and that's it. Right? It's a completely different realm. And so, yeah, and getting an indie game dev out, getting an indie game is just a monumental task compared to AAA. And I would also say, I believe the noise level in indie games is higher than AAA. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you would agree with that, Josh.
Yeah, I think I would say again, there's so many indie devs vying for time, right, that it is very hard to stand out. Like we've said earlier, that the independent space has such a low barrier of entry. And again, I think it leads back into that trap from AAA, that you think, well, I know a little of Unity, or, I did a little bit of something on this project, let me just now turn that into a full-blown game. there is such a huge difference between I release a little, 5 to 10 minute prototype on itch to I now release this fully released game on Steam and it became the new Celeste or the new Vampire Survivors. And like we said, I do feel like there may be that touch of either envy or elitism. That, this silly little pixel-driven platformer sold really well. Or, how did this game sell? It didn't even have guns and a Battle Royale mode. But again, the reason why those games sell is that they did something legitimately different, and they resonated with people. And again, getting back to this idea of like the clout and the prestige of AAA, when's the last time outside like the super hardcore fanboys and fangirls of a game do we see a game like resonate with someone as much as Celeste did, or Disco Elysium, or even stuff like FTL and Darkest Dungeon, where the fans are there not because, this studio made $50 million, but because the people actively care about this company and they want to see it succeed.
Yeah, I cannot think of a good example. I mean, when you're really thinking about standout games that like make a difference and change the genres and push it forward, it's not happening in AAA. And I actually just saw a post. Someone, they were complaining about like AAA graphics. It's like they haven't improved in 10 years, and that's all they got. That's all they have, good graphics. And which is true, and so we all know that like graphics are just a part of it. We know that gameplay is the core, and what you do and how you experience it. And so like the only things that AAA can really hang on to is like they haven't been improving on it. Like they haven't improved. There haven't been major improvements in AI in AAA games that I've seen. There haven't been major improvements in like. In graphics that I've seen, it's been pretty much stale for years and years, and the malaise is just getting worse. And so that's why the games that really resonate are these very unique and amazing experiences with, just because the graphics were low, quality sprites in Vampire Survivors or whatever, it's still an amazing quality game, right? With its own aesthetics. And it's like, you can do so much with so little, but you still it's not like you can. I think the elitist thing you're talking about is they think, okay, well, I'm just going to go buy like a $10 pack of sprites and put this game together, and it's going to sell because I know everything and I worked in Call of Duty. But that's not what it is.
So what you're saying is that the next Call of Duty will be all pixel art.
All pixel art, yes.
And
checkbox in Unreal Engine 5.
And buying like the $10 pixel art asset, that also I think just drove a stake through a lot of indie developer and a lot of indie artists' heart. I think when you just
a couple stakes thrown today.
And again, like to that point, it's where do we see innovation? And again, if you look at how much what you just said about 10 years. Look at how far indie games have come in the span of 10 years. In 2010, we had, Super Meat Boy, Braid, stuff like that. By 2020, we had Celeste, Disco Elysium, The Outer Wilds, so many other games I can't remember. Slay the Spire, Darkest Dungeon, FTL. Like, these were games.
Those ones that you're mentioning are literally like the best games that have come out, right? Like, can you think of what AAA game has matched that, or you can say, okay, that's it stands out just as much, or it's genre defining, or it's new. I cannot think of one AAA game that has done that in the last.
And I know, like, if this gets to, like, the Sony and major console fanboys, we'll get people screaming, well, what about God of War? And what about Horizon? And my response to that is, yeah, what about it? One's a standard 3D action game. The other is a standard 3D open world adventure game.
Exactly.
And when I look at, again, like last year, my favorite game was Library of Runa, a visual novel deck-building RPG that like defies like game design logic with the things they put into that. And right now in about a month they're releasing their next game, which is going to be a puzzle gotcha visual novel crazy looking game called Limbus Company, and the fans are already chomping at the bit for that game. And again, there's that point that a lot of indie games, the ones that stand out, they resonate with people. People don't so much care about, an individual game anymore. They care about the livelihood of that studio. They want that studio to keep making games. Clay Entertainment, Kid Fox, Dwarf Fortress, I think, is another standout example. That, as we said, one of the best stories of last year is that the brothers, Zach and Torn, they're now millionaires.
Yes.
They, after 30 years or more of working on that game, they're set. And I am sure there are a few AAA developers probably sneering at that game going, what the hell did they do? Why does this sell? And why doesn't, the Call of Duty game I worked on, or my Gears of War clone, or whatever, is even bringing in a quarter of that? And it is, again, that misunderstanding of why people play indie games. That it's not about the graphical polish or the prestige of that studio. As a very interesting point, it was announced literally yesterday, I mentioned this as a new piece, that Factorio, the developers behind, they're going to actually raise the price of the game up because of how inflation works. And guess what? No one can complain about that because guess what? Can you find another game like Factorio that's exactly like it? Can you find a game that's exactly like Dwarf Fortress?
I'll buy another copy at the new price, just for fun.
Yeah. And it is that case, again, of how much having that standout indie game really changes your studio. And it's why I think a lot of AAA studios tend to suffer. That if everyone is just making another Battle Royale, or another 3D platform, or another first-person shooter, okay, it could sell well, but it's not going to draw someone like saying, we just create a brand new take on a visual novel game. Or, the love letter to platforming that was Celeste and its amazing story. And people can tell, I think that's another thing we've said before, that the consumer, I think, can tell when someone's heart is in a game.
Yes.
That when it's a title that they didn't make this because, they were bored one day, or they felt like, I just want to compete with Call of Duty. We see some fantastic indie games that literally could not come from any other company. Do you really think that a AAA studio would make a game like Faith? A, 8-bit text-to-speech horror game? Or would any major studio do anything that would be in a DreadX collection? Or any of the major or even smaller pet projects that we see come from itch? That game at Terra Nil that I really loved, that started out just literally as this quirky little prototype that people were showing off on itch, and now it's being published by Devolver. And I'm sure that game is going to do fantastic. But again, the
Devolver helping them, yeah.
But again, the point still stands. Would a AAA studio ever stumble upon the next big indie idea? And the answer is no. And someone could argue, well, what about a game like Hearthstone? Hearthstone came out as this, anomaly out of Blizzard. But again, that was Blizzard trying to, look at what was popular and say, well, let's make our take on it. And like we said, Blizzard at its height, they are the king of iteration. They're not the best at evolution of their designs.
Not at all. No, iteration, but not, and you can see that with Overwatch 2, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And again, we could also argue we saw it with Diablo 3.
Diablo 3. Yeah.
People tend to forget just how horrible Diablo 3 was at 1.0. And it technically didn't become good until patch 1.04. Yeah. But again, that basically left a gigantic door open for Grinding Gears game with Path of Exile, with Crate Entertainment with Grim Dawn. And they basically just said, hey, you like the genre? You hate what they did with Diablo 3? Right here, come get it. And it work swimmingly. And as one final point, then I'm going to stop talking. I'll throw it over to you for a second because my voice is starting to go. Look at the difference between Genshin Impact and Marvel Avengers. Hey, Pony. Marvel's Avenger was announced this week that the game is going to basically die. It is done updates come March, and then the servers are going to be shut down by September.
Oh no.
Exactly. And it's that situation where you had all the money and clout of Marvel, Naughty Dog, I think it was. No, not Marvel, no, Crystal Dynamics.
Yeah.
Disney. And then you have MiHoYo, a studio that probably most Western consumers, probably a lot of Western developers, never even heard of. Guess what game is still going fantastic and is probably going to has earned, MiHoYo, I kind of spoiled there, MiHoYo has probably earned 100, 200, oh, my thing just fell as I said MiHoYo there, or I think it's because I pissed off Marvel, it earned like 200 times the amount that Marvel's Avengers did. And someone on Twitter had a really good point. Crystal Dynamics did not understand live service design. Guess who did? MiHoYo, the developer of Honkai Impact 3rd, or whatever it's called. And it is, again, that kind of, I think, elitism that because we made one successful game means we can make all the successful games. The infamous BioWare Magic article that came out a few years ago, I think, is also proof positive of this. And it is that situation where people notice when you kind of put in the effort, and where you don't put in the effort as well, and that can be seen front and center in the independent space.
For sure. And again, like the soul and the heart of indie games can be seen, and like you can feel it, it's there, when the developers in it and they're there. Yeah, the creator of Genshin Impact. When their soul and their heart's into it, and you can feel when it's a soulless experiment, almost cash grab. And I feel like a lot of them are really like elitists trying to come cash grab. Like they feel now that they know that the independent scene is viable, they want to come into it and extract money from it. And they believe that it might be an easier way to do it. We can do a smaller budget, or we can do something, whatever, and just go in there because, look, there's a bunch of clowns in here not really doing anything. The pros need to come in here and make the games, right? So yeah. I think that's what it is.
And I think as you just put there, I think is really poignant. That idea that, well, if John and Jane, this two-person independent studio, can make this emotionally driven platformer, then, the 15 of us who have 40-plus years collective in the game industry, and we've worked on, Call of Duty, Battlefield, Dead Space, whatever, we could make an emotionally driven platform. I bet we can do it in half the time. With a quarter of the budget. And it's going to, destroy everyone emotionally. It will be like that Dragon Cancer times 1,000,000. Guess what? It doesn't really work that way. And we could even look at something like the Callisto Protocol. That a lot of people, once again, when that game was being like marketed and publicized, were going, this is from the creator of Dead Space. This is from, based off of PUBG, and look at how much money we spent on motion capturing and all that. It didn't even make it to, like, honorable mentions for me for best horror game. My two favorite horror games were Signalis and Faith of 2022. Two games that I can tell you did not have the budget anywhere close to that of the Callisto Protocol.
I wish more indie studios could disclose the budget so we would know, like, actually what they spent on, like, so how much did they spend on Signalis? That would be really interesting to know.
Mm-hmm. And again, like, trying to chase, as you were just saying, like, trying to chase what someone else has already done. As a very, I think, poignant example of that, we've seen this with mobile games. How many studios thought to themselves, well, if this, unknown Chinese or Japanese developer made $30 million a month on a Match 3 game or a Puzzle and Dragons, why don't we make our own mobile game? We've seen this with Nintendo, Square Enix, there's a few other ones. I think Capcom may have one. Yeah. Square Enix, like, all of their mobile games have just, like, failed horribly.
So bad. So bad.
And again, speaking about Square Enix and even Ubisoft, what about the whole push for NFT-driven games and the blockchain games? And we still need to get Tomo on for the AI art discussion.
Yes.
But, again, it's that situation where I think it goes back to the idea of being too big to fail. That, we're Square Enix or we're Activision. We can, throw a few million or $1 billion in and make the first big blockchain game and it will succeed. Ubisoft, as they took a huge hit and they even have, I think, like a strike happening because the founder or the president said, well, the developers have to, pick up the slack. Because all the developers, they all jumped at wanting to make an NFT game.
Yeah, definitely.
And
we all do.
I know, that's going to be the next Samurai Pig, all NFTs.
All NFTs. Mm-hmm. Like the whole core gameplay loop is literally just NFTs.
And I think this goes back, or this is a really good point to bring back to the start of this cast, that 10 years ago, like we said, you weren't thinking about staying an independent. You were thinking, okay, I'm going to go into AAA. But as we've seen like the past 3 to 4 years, a lot of AAA these days is maybe on a good day average, but on a lot of days just kind of bad with issues of unionizing. Let's not forget all the Blizzard accusations and actual lawsuits happening. Riot as well, and other companies.
Like literally working in the industry, literally working in that industry is very toxic. Like it is a difficult industry to work with, like work environment wise, crunch wise, and then what you actually get out of it. Like just a side tangent. Like if you're just going and you're like, okay, I want to work in games, and then, but we keep going back to the grass modeling one. But like, let's just say that's all you're doing. Like when you leave, what skills do you actually have? You know what I mean? And if you were to instead be an indie game developer with someone with many hats, you would understand the whole entire game development process from the start to the end, for the finish, to actually pressing the button to submit it to the Steam store. When you've done all of that and you understand the whole process, then that's a different story. But like even if you just have you don't really come out a lot with the AAA. I'm not really trying to say don't work in the AAA, but probably don't. The job security, the toxic environment. I mean, what are the reasons that you'd want to go? Because you say, okay, I'm going to get clout, I'm going to get named. We just said that doesn't matter. Okay, so you're going to come out with any skills? Not really, because those skills aren't going to really translate into the indie game scene. So other than a paycheck, you're not really coming out with a lot from the AAA scene. In the indie scene, you will definitely be creating your name, definitely creating the clout through each game, etc. So,
and the 2 important points I want to add to what you just said. The first is that there are definitely talks about toxic behaviors and not good stuff happening in the independent space. There are companies that have unfortunately been accused or have been confirmed in that.
Yes.
But as we've said, when it comes to the AAA side, as you just said, what do you get outside of a paycheck? And it's kind of, again, it's kind of a very interesting analog to being a influencer. That your name in this space is only recognizable within that space. Right. Just like with the AAA side. If you say, I worked on so-and-so from Nintendo or Electronic Arts, and you go to another major studio, they will probably welcome you with open arms. Again, you try that in the independent side, nobody cares about you. And it's the same thing, again, with kind of the online world. Yes, there are a lot of famous people on YouTube and Twitch, obviously. They mean basically zero if we leave those spaces. And it's important, again, to kind of establish where you want to be. And if you can survive, again, for the major heads, department leads, studio founders of AAA, they're fine. Like, they're not going to be, crying their eyes out or suffering anytime soon. But if you're, like we say, if you're that cog in the machine, you're not really able to kind of see the breadth of what it means to go into game dev. And as we've said over the last almost an hour, there is a lot to this. And just because you think, well, I did modeling on Call of Duty, now I can make my take on Baldur's Gate, that's not going to happen. Oh, and that's another point I just want to ramble on about for a second. One of the games that I played that had the credits of AAA was this third-person RPG. And so, from people worked on Mass Effect and Dragon's Age and Baldur's Gate, every major CRPG in the last 20 years, I played it when it was on early access or an early build of it, and it was terrible. The UI was horrible. It looked just completely uninteresting to play. And again, it's that case of what exactly did you pick up working on these games?
Right. And that's completely evident. That's completely evident, right? When you're saying the UI was terrible, it doesn't play right. What they actually learned in the studio was so little, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't take you because you don't like the only way that you will be able to learn more is if you go a little higher up, but then you get detached from the actual creation of the lower end part the higher you go up in the hierarchy. And then the lower you are, the more detached you are from the high end stuff of it. So
you become, again, very laser focused on what you actually worked on, but it may just be this little chunk compared to the entirety of the game. And again, it's that idea of you can make your version of Baldur's Gate or your version of Planescape Torment and any other major CRPG, but is that something that is going to resonate with people? And again, UI UX, I think, again, I can scream that point for the next hour. So many, I think, developers who come from AAA to indie do not understand the value of UI UX. Because it's, again, not something that you really think about. How many people who do sound design are thinking about, well, are my buttons properly set up on my UI? Does my game have volume sliders? Did I actually build the front end of my UI?
Does it work with a keyboard and a gamepad?
Oh, yes. that hurt me with that one.
How many stakes this time, Josh?
Oh, that was a lot right there. Even the things that we take for, the things that we yell at indie developers for, that we take for granted, a lot of people in the AAA space probably don't even think about that. Yeah. The idea that your UI can update dynamically whether you're using a keyboard or a gamepad. That is something that we consider stock. It is standard, and there are still games that don't do that. And these are the things, again, that if all you do is focus on one narrow aspect of game dev, you're never going to even think about that until it is way too late. And I've interviewed and I've seen developers talk about postmortems of their game. They go, I didn't think that was a problem. Why should I render my entire screen? Why don't I just have this giant black box and no one can see 3/4 of my screen? Or this corner of the screen cannot actually be viewed because it's all mismatched UI elements. Why would people be bothered by that? Or why are people complaining that we don't have volume sliders or no keyboard rebindings? And we're just sitting there going this is stuff that we learn day zero when you're an indie developer.
Right. Indie and again, I think I say it every podcast, the UI and the menu is the first thing that you should have set up as your base for your prototype. And that's because it is so important. It's not it's because it is standard, and it's not something. So you just need to put the standard things, like if you're building a car, you got to put the tires on there, and it's just the tires have to be on the car for for it to work. And like, so yeah, UI UX, please always do that first. Make sure that's working, and then you can go ahead with everything else, because it becomes so disjointed when you make your game first, your prototype first, and you think, oh, I'm going to put the menu over it. I promise you, it doesn't work that way.
You can't just copy paste Control C, Control V UI.
No, you cannot. Unfortunately.
And being able, again, like we said, to have like that heart of your game, people want to see an effort. They want to see something different.
Yes.
And again, this is where aesthetics really are hammered home. Aesthetic does not mean stock Unity 5 assets or brown and gray military shooter. And I think that's another, harsh reality a lot of people have when they go into the independent space. That there are people who find, God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn and games like that to be beautiful. I just look at that stuff and it just looks painfully like, yeah, it's high def. And then I'm over here oohing and eyeing at like a pixel game, or Fear and Hunger 2, or, a game that may just have like stock image frames.
Right. And I mean, it's just that, I don't know, again, the AAA malaise, but it's like, there's not, okay, good, amazing. You spent a ton of money for modelers and it looks really great and it's high fidelity. But if you took all of that away, what is actually underneath the graphics, right? It is just a basic, like you said, God of War is just an action game. Horizon's just another open world, another open world game. They're not different. There's nothing unique or special about them. The story's not that riveting, I promise. It's just it's something you've seen before and something you haven't seen. But playing Signalis, that is something you haven't seen before, right? Mm-hmm. That is something new. Or Faith, for example, or Cavity Busters or something like that, right? Like, those are all different new experiences, and you would never see that in the AAA space. And so these devs coming from the AAA, they believe, I think they believe that it's just so simple, that the games look so simple on the outside, but inside it's so deep, right? Mm-hmm. And it just looking from that, judging the book by its cover is wrong in that regard, right? You'd say, okay, mm-hmm. No, it's simple, that it should be that way, but it's not, far from it.
Mm-hmm. And how many stones have we thrown at Sony? I think over like the last 30 minutes.
A few.
We're gonna get.
I think, what is this? It's a stick stone show, man.
Yeah. And yeah, like, to that point, it's easy to look, and like pixel art again, I think, is that quintessential example that it's easy to look at pixel art as every pixel art is just a bunch of blocks. That, there's no difference between Pong and Owlboy. But there is huge amount of work that goes into making these games look, and again, making them play well.
Yeah.
And these are things that it doesn't sound as important when you have an entire playtesting team and Q&A supporting you. But when you're trying to build your first game and you think, well, Vampire Survivors just did pixel art, let me just hit pixel art on Google and see what comes up, and that's what I'll build my game around. It doesn't work like that. And like we said, there is a huge difference between aesthetics and graphics, or graphical horsepower. And if you cannot give someone a reason to care about your game, they are not going to come, and they're not going to resonate. And we again can turn to some of the heights of the indie dev space in this respect. That people become fans for life. And in these cases, unless that developer just kind of fumbles the ball, like intentionally, they're going to have a devoted and recognizable market. New Blood, excuse me, New Blood with Ultra Kill, Dusk, and so on. They're probably one of the best examples of this. They're probably, I think, of like recent. I'm saying like 3 to 4 years. Probably the newest example of that studio that has become famous thanks to not only its games but the people who work there. And while my voice is about to die on me, another big point again is about the coughing about transparency. We know who works at Kitfox. We know the people who work at Clay, at again Zach and Tarn Adams, at New Blood. Do we know who was the fourth costume artist who worked on Horizon Zero Dawn? Or who was the person who actually did, the UI fonts in God of War Ragnarok?
They probably didn't get credit.
Yeah, that's another good point. They probably didn't even get credit for that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just another side. Like, real quick, just to go back to that thing about what do you take away from working in AAA is that a lot of people don't even get credit for their work, right? So it's just, man, don't go to that space.
And long term, again, is that other point. We're about like, a little over an hour, so we'll probably wrap things in like the next 10 to 15 minutes, I would imagine. But if you think that working on a game for 5 to 6 years in the AAA space is the same as working 5 to 6 years in the indie, no, that is a very harsh truth you need to learn.
Definitely. Again, like the massive difference between being a AAA dev or working in AAA and working in indie, the difference is just so huge again, you're at zero, you're at step zero, and you have to build up your cloud. And like you said, like how many games, like I get a couple games under your belt before you even do that. And these studios, they're coming and they're expecting their first game with all their money to be, that's one thing, right? They're expecting their very first one. They're coming out, we did all this, we did the UI, we blah, blah, blah. And so our very first one's going to be the best one, when actually they don't even know how to put a game together yet. Right, they don't even know how all the parts fit together yet, because one guy was like, "Bro, I only did grass," and the other one's like, "I just did skin textures." So like, oh, we're gonna have great grass and skin. But it, like when you get to that point, when you get to indie dev, you really got to study and know, follow game wisdom for one, like. Come here and you can learn about indie dev, because it's completely different from working in AAA.
Yeah, and I think I would trust an indie dev to spend 3 to 5 years on a project as opposed to a AAA developer doing the very same thing.
Yes, 100%. And like going back to what you said about when a studio finally gets famous, that they have fans for life. Like, I mean, I will check out any Kitfox game. I will check out any Zachtronics game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, these people, we know the studios, and we know who they work for. I mean, we know who they are. And so, we develop a relationship and we trust them and we know what to expect from them. Honestly, do you know what you can expect from another AAA game? Probably it's just going to be the same derivative. But I mean, that's the deal.
Yeah, and again, I think it's that very big differentiator between the two. The AAA space, it's about recognizing, if this studio made a really good first-person shooter, then I can assume their next game is going to be a first-person shooter.
Right.
And the game after that is going to be a first-person shooter. I mean, how many people got really upset when Toys for Bob, the makers of Crash 4, got then pulled on just making Call of Duty maps and working on that?
Yeah.
And the reason why a lot of people resonated with Toys for Bob, outside being the developers of Skylanders, was they made Crash Bandicoot 4, they did the Tony Hawk Pro Skater remake. And again, the reason those games resonate was we weren't getting games like that from the AAA space. And of course, Activision said, well, now your reward is you get to make Call of Duty. And again, it's that difference, I think, in, like...
It's a punishment, man.
I know. Again, I think it's that kind of, like the Hollywood allure that, oh, you can work on your little indie project with your 3 friends, or how about if I give you a $20 million budget and you make a Marvel movie? Again, I don't even know if $20 million is considered low or even in the ballpark there.
Yeah,
but
I don't know.
Again, but when we look at it from the independent space, it becomes more about that studio. Look at Clay's arc. They went from, what was it, Shiv or Shank to Mark of the Ninja to Don't Starve to Invisible Ink to Auction Not Included, Hot Lava, Grifflins.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sure they must be working on something else new right now. But that is just, 7 fundamentally different games. Mm-hmm. Supergiant Games. Again, like the whole big shocker isn't so much that there's a Hades 2. Or, I'm sorry, isn't that there's a new Supergiant game, but that it's a sequel. Because you look at Bastion to Transistor to Pyre to Hades, again, very different games. And as we've said, and again, like when I get my post after the 2022 list is finally wrapped up about game analysis, that a lot of people, as we said, they look at indie games as just, very flat, some of its parts. I think, like, again, to your car analogy, all they did was use a stock engine and stock tires, and, that's how this car worked. But when you look under the surface and you see the amount of care, and again, the amount of originality behind these games, that's not something that you can easily just, look at a screenshot and say, oh, Hades succeeded just by looking at one screenshot because of procedural generated design and amazing story. You're not getting that from a image on a Polygon or a Kotaku article. But again, a lot of people don't understand why a game like a Factorio or a Celeste or a Disco Elysium could sell head over heels more than a God of War or the Outer Worlds. And even, again, like, we can look at, like, some of the more nichier AAA games. We mentioned Elden Ring. Who could have imagined that Elden Ring, before it came out, would have blown everyone else out of the water? And, a lot of people looked at that game going, why did this game succeed? Why is Elden Ring getting all these awards and not God of War and not Stray and so on?
Exactly. And that's because Elden Ring did something different. Mm-hmm. They went against the grain, and it's a quality game, right? And they bucked some of the conventions with, like, the quest designs and just like just the way that AAA believed the games are supposed to be designed. It went against that, and so that again, that's hard to understand. And it's like you need to understand why it did well, not understanding why it did well, and looking at Factorio and seeing, like, okay, what about Factorio that is so addictive that it makes it work, right? And it's like it's not like, I don't know, Josh, something. It's the core gameplay, right? It's not just that it was like cheap sprites and this and that. It's the core gameplay and how great of a game it is. Mm-hmm. So,
why did Dwarf Fortress do so well? How many people have chased Dwarf Fortress over the past 20 years? How many colony sims have we seen from smaller developers? How many Factorio likes have we seen? Again, how many Battle Royale likes and Fortnite likes and so on? And like, speaking about Factorio, like, the only game that I've seen that has done remarkably well next to it was Dyson Sphere Program. And the reason why Dyson Sphere Program did so well, once again, was if Factorio goes in this direction with its design, we're going over here. Like, we are not going to try and chase after it. And that's that other lesson you have to learn. And it's something, again, that even a harsh reality for a lot of indie devs. By the time you see a design blow up, it is far too late to chase that same design.
Yeah.
How many Vampire Survivor likes have I personally played in 2022 and will probably end up in 2023? And how many of them have even gotten like a tenth of the way to the success of Vampire Survivors.
Not even close. I think when we had the Vampire Survivors podcast and we were talking about it, we brought up the question: do you think any other game can reach the same level? And both of us were like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. And we need to do that roundtable talk about why do certain games succeed? Why are certain ones having that, golden ticket? Because I can tell you with 100% certainty that a lot of indie devs don't know, and a lot of AAA developers certainly don't know that as well.
Exactly. Let's see here. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
And I guess with that said, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we didn't touch on. I guess we could briefly mention, again, marketing and PR. Again, having a good store page, having press kits, reaching out to people. I think that's another... I don't know, this is, again, more like theory crafting than actual, facts, but I wonder how many AAA developers who go in the independent space think that they don't need to do marketing.
Yeah. I think again they're relying on their clout, like you said. They make the trailer, the soulless trailer with their name, and then what was the game? The Osiris, the one you were mentioning, they haven't updated in 5 years, and they're just depending on their clout. And yeah, man, when you come in here, like you mentioned, the marketing being so bad, it's because they had all the marketing done for them, and they're relying on their clout and then a little bit of elitist mentality, I believe, to think that people are just going to buy the game because of our name and that's it, right? They know who we are. We worked on God of War. They love God of War, so they'll buy this game.
And I just remember another big example, Yuji Naka, one of the co-creators of Sonic. His post-Sonic Team career has not been good. And
what has he been doing?
Oh, he made that Battle in Wonderworld game, and now I think he's been arrested for insider trading on top of that.
Right.
And again, it's that case of...
He was arrested for Battle in Wonderworld.
That would have been a very interesting story bit right there. But it's that situation where even if you are the creative lead, let's say you were the lead designer on Call of Duty, on God of War. I think God of War as well, because I think, not Cory Balrog, the original one, whose name I'm forgetting right now.
Ooh. Oh, yeah. I can't remember his name either.
David Jaffe, I think.
David Jaffe. Good job.
Again, his post-God of War kind of resume has not been anywhere near as close to that. And a lot of developers are going to try to chase that success. But we also learn, like we've said over the course of this episode, you may have been the person who managed the team, who made Diablo, who made Tomb Raider, or any other big name. Now when you have to do all the work yourself, what do? You can't just turn to, someone, your imaginary friend in your office and say, go make art. You do the press work.
Right. Yeah, so now all the hats fall on you. And so that's where it comes down to, figuring out your strengths and your weaknesses and going from there, and where you can, get help and what you can do on your own. Because once you lose all those resources, you're the only one. And again, you have to make all the decisions. The canvas is blank, and you have to decide what to put on there. It's up to you. There's no... Even if you were the lead designer, there were some other designers working with you that were saying, I don't know, this and that, and this and that. But now you're the sole one, and that's the difference.
Yeah, and return to that point about playtesting. I'm sure there is that sense of elitism that what do these consumers know? I was part of the team that did so and so. How dare they question me? And again, it's that situation where I have lost count of how many indie games I've played that from a team of 3 to 5 people who have had no other credits in the industry made a phenomenal prototype or a phenomenal game. And then, this team of 4 or 5 people who have, combined 30 years of experience, it looks horrible. It plays terrible. And like we've said, you have to understand the genre. You have to understand that there's more to making a successful game than you just kind of being like tunnel vision on one aspect of the game. We're not going to work on anything else. And expect that to do anything. Because I think one last point for me, and then my voice may just cut out on me. As we said, the barrier of entry has gone way low. A 2-person team working in their spare time can make a fantastic game. Probably even more than a team of 30, 50 people 20 years ago working on a game using the most expensive engines and the biggest budgets. And if you think that money and prestige, and again, just kind of like technical horsepower, is going to allow you to compete like that and compete in the independent space, no, that's not what we've seen. Again, look at something like Cruelty Squad. This game that looks like this janky mashup of 3D textures and modeling.
Yes.
Is it going to be the next Call of Duty? No, absolutely not. But it has earned a name for itself. The developer has earned clout from that game. And they are probably more recognizable than someone who did work on Call of Duty or did work on Final Fantasy.
Yep.
And their next game, whatever it may be, I'm going to guarantee you their eye is going to be on it. Just like The Messenger. And if you can take... I guess here's like the final point. I'm going to throw over to you for this one. What do you think are good lessons to take away from working in a AAA studio? Like, what are some of the things you think should someone actually pay attention to before they kind of go out into the independent space?
So if I was working in the AAA, what I would do is I would try and take a holistic approach and like really talk to everybody in every department. And I would try to figure out how everything is put together, because as an indie dev, right? As an indie dev, you learn from ground zero how to put everything together. You got that blank canvas and you start. But when you're working in the AAA, like everything's already going and everything's already moving. So what you really need to do is figure out how everything was put together. Okay, how does the art team talk to the sound team? How does the programming team talk to the QA? And like you need to see how all the pieces fit. So the one thing I would take, or there's multiple things you take away, but one of the most important things you would take away is how everything is put together, the whole thing, how the sausage is actually made and finally put together. Because if you're looking at it from just a very small point, like it's just, just my modeling and this and that, you have to look wider into the whole thing. The game you're working on, say you're working on God of War or Call of Duty, for example, or what's making this game work? What feels good about the combat? What works with the stats? Do players like study what works about the game you're working on and how everything fits together and take those pieces away. Also study like a little bit, maybe you can study some of the business management. How are they doing that? If you can talk to people, I'd recommend networking and talking to as many people in every department as possible, and that way you could take away as much as you can when you do leave, because you should.
And I think, too, what you just said about understanding why a game succeeds, that also means understanding, did this game succeed because it did anything original? Or did it succeed because of the name and the prestige behind it?
Well said.
Again, you can, as one of the biggest things that we have talked about, as an indie dev, you cannot make anywhere near the same amount of mistakes or issues with your game compared to a AAA studio. And you cannot, and again, I cannot stress this enough, you cannot say, well, if Nintendo did this, or if Blizzard did this, then it's okay for me.
Right.
No. Because, again, they have something that you as an indie developer will never get. Even if you do become successful, you will never get the clout of Nintendo. Kit Fox will never be compared to Nintendo. Zack and Tarn will never be compared to Blizzard or Activision. Factorio will never be compared to Sony Santa Monica. And that is a very crucial and critical point. You need to work within your own space and within your own clout. And again, studios like Kid Fox. I keep forgetting the actual name of the Dwarf Fortress developer studios. But they have their own clout. They know what their fans are. Their fans support that. But they will never be compared to another studio. And if you're going from AAA to indie, and you think that, well, I can just make a Call of Duty game, it's just that simple, and we'll sell, half as much as what Activision could do. Bay 12, thank you. If you think that, you are never going to succeed, because you will never be able to come close to those games, and you may never even understand why they succeeded. Because I can guarantee you right now that if you think God of War Ragnarok succeeded because it had amazing graphics, a beautiful story, or even fantastic action gameplay, let me pop that balloon and say no. It did not succeed because of that. No. Likewise, same goes for Horizon Zero Dawn, or the same goes for Skyrim, or pick any Call of Duty.
Exactly. Well said, Josh.
And there's my stab at all the Sony fans.
There was at least five Sony stabs.
All right. So, any other points? Because I think that sums it up for me.
Yeah, I think we basically covered it. Yeah, Josh, I think that's it.
All right. I guess any final thoughts?
Final thoughts would be, I would say, if you are, well, like I said previously, if you are in the AAA, if there's anybody watching that's in the AAA and you're looking to go into indie, do your homework. Join the Game Wisdom Discord. Learn about how indie games are made, because it's a whole different world. You have so much cushion and support and backup when you're working in AAA, and you have none of that in indie. And so when you're working indie, you not only need to know how to build the game, design the game, understand why the game works, but you also have to do all the marketing, all the audio, all the PR, all the art. You have to make all the decisions. So there's a lot. So if you are considering going from AAA to indie, just be aware that it is a massive sea change. It's a completely different environment to work in, and you have to be prepared for it. Do not jump in thinking that your first, no one should think that their first game is going to blow up, and especially do not think that your name will carry any weight from AAA, because I haven't heard of anybody in AAA, and I don't know who you are, but I definitely know who people are in the indie space, in the studios. That is for sure.
And do not discount again, or do not turn your nose up at an indie game that succeeded. That just because it's a genre that you didn't like or you don't understand, it was not due to luck that a game like Celeste or Disco Elysium or again, a Dwarf Fortress succeeded. It took a lot more time and effort than even a AAA game. Again, 3 to 5 years of working in indie is monumentally different than 3 to 5 years working at AAA.
Exactly.
And it's why, again, that people like us, we celebrate when an indie game is released. Whether it's good, bad, or average, just being able to take an indie game from start to finish is a monumental trial. And again, you will learn a lot about game dev and game design spending 3 years working and releasing an indie game than spending maybe 5 to 7 years working on and releasing a AAA. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely, Josh.
But I think that will do it for our episode.
Okay. So, and we already got our topic for next week, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the influence of competitive games and multiplayer.
Right.
And I'm going to warn everyone that my thumbnail is not going to be the best, because I had one that I wanted to do, but would get me in so much trouble if I did it for.
I wish you could do it. I wish you could do it.
It'll be too much chaos energy, I think, if I use the idea in my head for it.
Yeah.
But thank you everybody for tuning in. As always, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. You'll find my information up there and down below.
Same thing for me. My information is down below. Wishlist Samurai Pig, Rooster Rampage. Join the Game Wisdom Discord. Come chat with us. Give us more ideas for the next shows. Buy Josh's book. And I will see you next time, Josh.
Mm-hmm. We will be back next Saturday around 5 p.m. ET for the show. As Josh said, buy like 47 copies of all my books. Be sure to wishlist the next book on deck building, on trading and collectible card games. And just preemptively buy 50 copies of the RPG book, despite the fact that there is actually no information out there. Just throw money and it will somehow get to me, I'm sure.
Indeed.
But everyone, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend and the week. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.